Some of you may be wondering from the previous episode, after you do your laundry, where do you put it? Where do you hang it up? And the answer, of course, is anywhere. So I got late today for my temperature checking. They actually had to call me through the phone to remind me to do it, which is fine. At least I got extra 30 minutes of sleep, which is good. Also, we're expecting a new group of people coming in at 8 a.m., so we'll have bigger company. Also, on an update on my social media, I just learned how to use a Twitter hashtag and a Facebook story, which makes me feel like I've been lifted to a higher state. You also might notice that I'm dressed a bit less casual today. That's because I'm trying to transition a bit away from the lifestyle things I've been doing and towards more hyper nerdy things that I've been working on. So I study international history, but one little thing that I'm quite interested in is etymology, which is the history and origins of words and how their meanings change through time. Given that I'm currently in quarantine, I think it will be very interesting to explore how the term originated and came to mean being kept in isolation. And if you excuse me, I need to change my setup. So the modern definition of the word quarantine actually originated in the 1660s. It was derived from a Venetian policy in 1377, where ships that are suspected of carrying a disease are kept in port for 40 days, or in Italian, 40 giorni. 40, of course, is 40 in Italian, which is derived from Latin, quadraginta, meaning 40, which is derived from the before, quattur. It's also important to note that quarantine in its modern meaning did originate in the 1660s in England, and that was because prior to that, the word quarantine was actually used for other reasons. One of these cases was called the widow's quarantine, where in a period of 40 days after the husband's death, the widow is able to remain in his house. Of course, this information is a bit suspect because it's from the internet, but after I did some checking, I did find an evidence of it in the Magna Carta in 1215, as well as in English common law at the time. Now, the word quarantine also had a meaning in religious language. Quarantine around the medieval age referred to the desert in which Jesus Christ fasted for 40 days. I haven't actually seen any primary sources where this was being used in documents, so I'm not sure if I can verify this. Sorry for the new location, I was trying to look for better lighting. As you can see, our studio isn't very well resourced. Now, I could just end the video there and just talk about quarantine's etymology, but I also want to look at its synonyms, since quarantine is actually a relatively new word for the English language. So I want to see what other alternatives there exist. One of those words is the one that I used in this video already, isolation. Surprisingly, isolation is actually a newer word to the English language than quarantine. It was introduced in the 1740s as it was derived from French. The original definition is spelled out as standing detached from others of its kind. The word came from French isolation, which is of course derived from isolé. The past form, of course, is isolé, which is derived from Italian isolato, which itself is derived from Latin insulatus. It might be evident already that, of course, insulatus means to be made into an island, which is derived from the Latin word insula. As I mentioned, isolated was a relatively new term at the time, and it even exists in primary sources, one of them actually even acknowledging it as a foreign word of its time. The term was used to describe China in the 1740s as a way of talking about how closed off it was. Another synonym for isolated, of course, is confinement, which is of course derived from French, confinement. In Old French, the word was actually confination, which derived from confiner. Confinement was used as early as 1772 as a euphemism for childbirth, as the person couldn't actually leave home due to either childbirth or sickness. If you go back to the English word confine, it actually just referred to borders or being a set boundary, as derived from the medieval Latin confinare. Fun fact, when I had to leave Geneva early, I had to actually inform my university that I was leaving, and one way to prove it was that I had to Google Translate my embassy's email to me saying that I had to leave. And in the passage describing state quarantine, Google actually translated quarantine into detention. There's one spelled detention, which was derived from the French detention, which of course was derived from the Latin detentionem. Detention, of course, means being detained, which is derived from French detenir. This is, of course, derived from Latin detenere, which the full word actually means to hold back or keep away. This was broken down from de, meaning away, and tenere, meaning to hold. Tenere, of course, has roots in English, like tenet, meaning a set of ideas that somebody holds, or tenure, meaning to possess or hold a certain kind of position. Finally, we have seclusion, which is derived from the Latin seclusionem, which of course is derived from secludere. Seclusion, of course, means to seclude someone or to enclose or shut up. The Latin word secludere could be broken down into se, meaning apart, and cludere, a variant of claudere, meaning to shut. Claudere could also be derived into its past participle form clausus, which would become the old French word clos, which would become the English word close. So some of you linguists out there might notice that all the words I have mentioned are Latin-based, but English is a Germanic language at its root. So what are the Germanic equivalents for quarantine? The word hiding could be a Germanic synonym for seclusion, which is of course derived from the Old English hidens. Personally, I don't think hiding sounds that great of an alternative for quarantine, since everybody knows where you are. You could be hiding from a disease, and more likely it's you being hidden so that you stop spreading diseases to other people. Another possible word is derived from the Latin segregation, in which its German equivalent is apartheid, which, no. The hide part is actually quite interesting because its English cognate is hood, as in neighborhood or brotherhood. This is a good way of trying to avoid words ending with ion, which is of course Latin-based. Unfortunately, we can't really find a pure Germanic word for quarantine, but it doesn't mean that people haven't been trying to propose new ones. So there's a wiki called the Anglish Moot, which compiles various things about English, a reconstruction of English with only Germanic roots. They compile an English English word book, which compiles various Romance words and their Germanic equivalent. Some words are tested, meaning there's evidence that this has been regularly used or in an official dictionary. But some words really do not have any recorded cases of certain terms. But there are proposals. And guess what? Quarantine has an entry. Unfortunately, there are no attested equivalents, but there are some proposals. One is self-sunderhood, shifting from the Latin self-isolation. The word itself is entirely Germanic, and sunder does mean keeping apart or separating. Another one that is quite interesting and amusing is homestuck, which, yeah, I'm sure some people on the internet found it more interesting than others. So guys, I need to end this video. It's taking a bit too long, and I feel like it's going to set quite a high benchmark for my future videos. I also need to edit the whole thing, which makes it extra busy, and my air conditioner isn't on, so I'm feeling really sweaty. You also might notice that there are no books in the back, and that's because I've been using them as a tripod for my iPhone to record this video. But don't you worry, next episode we're going to be talking about my books that I have on hand, so stay tuned for that. So thank you for watching, and still not dry.